The rain drummed against the windows of my Chicago apartment as I stared at my phone screen, reading the group chat messages I wasn't supposed to see. My cousin Tyler had forgotten to remove me from the family planning thread for Thanksgiving dinner. Is Rachel even coming this year? She's always sick with something, my Aunt Linda had written. Right. Last year it was her joint pain. The year before it was fatigue. There's always an excuse, came the reply from my sister Ashley. Maybe if she got off the couch and actually exercised instead of calling in sick to work every other week. That was my mom. My mom. I set the phone down with trembling hands, the familiar ache spreading through my joints like wildfire. At 32, I had built a successful career as a marketing director at a tech startup in downtown Chicago. I had my own apartment in Lincoln Park, drove a reliable Honda Civic, and had what most people would consider a good life. But for the past 3 years, that life had been punctuated by symptoms that seemed to come and go without warning. The fatigue that felt like someone had drained all the energy from my bones. The joint pain that made simple tasks like opening jars or climbing stairs feel like monumental challenges. The brain fog that sometimes made me forget words mid-sentence during important meetings. And the constant, gnawing fear that maybe everyone was right, maybe I was just weak, lazy, making excuses. I walked to my bathroom mirror and stared at my reflection. I looked normal, healthy even. My blonde hair was styled neatly, my skin had that subtle glow from the expensive moisturizer I'd splurged on. There were no visible signs of the invisible war my body was fighting against itself every single day. The apartment felt suffocating suddenly. I grabbed my jacket and headed out into the October evening, the cool air of Chicago's autumn hitting my face as I walked toward Lincoln Park Zoo. The city hummed around me, cars honking on Lakeshore Drive, couples walking hand in hand, joggers passing by with their effortless stride that I envied more than they could know. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend since college, Jessica. Hey babe, why night tomorrow? It's been forever since we hung out. I stared at the message, remembering the last time we'd made plans. I'd canceled last minute because I'd woken up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Jessica had been understanding, but I could hear the slight edge in her voice when she said, "No worries. Hope you feel better soon." It was the same tone everyone used now, polite concern masking growing frustration. "Can't tomorrow, have to work late." I typed back. It was easier than explaining that I'd spent my lunch break napping in my car because I couldn't keep my eyes open. You always have to work late these days. Everything okay? Everything was not okay. But how do you explain to someone that your own body has become your enemy? That some days, getting out of bed feels like climbing Mount Everest? That the person you used to be, the one who went salsa dancing on weeknights and ran 5 Burmese chats on weekends, feels like a stranger you're desperately trying to remember? I found myself at my favorite bench overlooking the park's pond. The water reflected the city lights, creating a mosaic of gold and white that usually brought me peace. Tonight, it just reminded me of how fractured everything felt. My phone rang. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, a picture of us from last Christmas, both smiling widely at my uncle's house in Naperville. "Hi, Mom." "Rachel, honey, I saw you were active in the family chat. Are you planning to come to Thanksgiving this year? Aunt Linda needs to know for head count." The casual way she asked, as if she hadn't just been discussing my supposed hypochondria with the entire family, made my chest tighten. "I'm planning to, yes." "Good. You know, honey, maybe this year you could help with some of the cooking prep? Aunt Linda does so much work. And well, you've been having a lot of sick days lately. Might be good to pitch in when you're feeling well." The implication hung heavy in the air. When you're feeling well. As if my illness was a choice, a mood, something I could simply decide to stop having. "I always help when I can, Mom." "Of course, sweetheart. Sometimes I worry you're letting these little aches and pains control your life too much. You're young and healthy. Maybe you need to push through it more, you know." Little aches and pains. If only she knew about the mornings I'd sat on my shower floor because standing felt impossible. The evenings I'd ordered takeout because lifting a pot to cook felt like an insurmountable task. The nights I'd cried from frustration because my own body felt like a prison. "I should go, Mom. Long day tomorrow." "All right, honey. Love you." "And Rachel? Maybe try to get some exercise this week. Fresh air and movement work wonders for the blues." The blues. As if 3 years of doctor's appointments, blood tests, and searching for answers was just a case of the blues. After she hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, watching families pack up their picnic blankets and couples head home for dinner. Normal people living normal lives, their bodies cooperating with their plans and dreams. I thought about Dr. Martinez, my rheumatologist, who I'd been seeing for 6 months. After years of being dismissed by other doctors who told me my symptoms were stress-related or suggested I needed therapy instead of medical treatment, she was the first one who truly listened. Who ordered comprehensive tests and didn't make me feel crazy for describing symptoms that seemed unrelated. Autoimmune conditions can be tricky to diagnose, she told me during our last appointment. But your ANA levels, combined with your symptoms and family history, point to something systemic. We're getting closer to answers. Answers. After 3 years of being told it was all in my head, the possibility of real answers felt both terrifying and hopeful. But even Dr. Martinez had warned me that getting a definitive diagnosis could take time. Time I wasn't sure I had before my relationships crumbled completely under the weight of everyone's assumption that I was simply weak, attention-seeking, or worse, lying. Walking back to my apartment, I passed a group of my neighbors heading out for their weekly trivia night at Murphy's pub down the street. They waved, and I waved back, pretending I didn't notice the way they didn't invite me anymore. Not since I'd had to leave early the last 3 times, exhaustion hitting me like a wall mid-evening. Inside my apartment, I made a cup of chamomile tea and settled onto my couch with my laptop. I had a presentation to finish for tomorrow's client meeting, but my hands were stiff and sore. I flexed my fingers, trying to work out the ache that had settled in my knuckles. My phone buzzed again. Another message in the family group chat. Maybe we should make it potluck style this year? Everyone brings something. Might be easier on Linda, and gives everyone a chance to contribute. Uncle Mike. Great idea. Rachel, you could bring dessert since it's easy to pick up something from the store. Ashley. Easy to pick up something from the store. Because God forbid I actually cook something myself. The assumption that I couldn't handle making a homemade dish stung more than it should have. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on. Happy to bring dessert. I'll make my grandmother's apple pie. It was a recipe that required peeling and chopping apples, making pastry from scratch, and standing in the kitchen for hours. On a good day, it was therapeutic. On a bad day, it would be torture. But I needed to prove to them and maybe to myself that I wasn't the fragile, unreliable person they decided I was. Are you sure? That's a lot of work, Mom. I'm sure. I closed the laptop without finishing the presentation and went to bed, my joints protesting as I pulled the covers over my shoulders. Tomorrow I had that client meeting, a doctor's appointment with Dr. Martinez to discuss my latest test results, and dinner with my college roommate who was in town for work. As I lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Chicago settling in for the night, I made a decision. Whatever Dr. Martinez told me tomorrow, whatever the test results showed, I was done hiding. Done making excuses. Done pretending everything was fine to make other people comfortable. If my family and friends thought I was always sick with something, then maybe it was time they knew exactly what that something was. The next morning arrived with the kind of stiffness that made me feel like I'd aged 30 years overnight. I lay in bed for 10 minutes, mentally preparing for the challenge of getting vertical, before finally forcing myself up. The shower helped, the hot water loosening some of the tension in my shoulders and lower back. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked tired despite 8 hours of sleep, but with concealer and a good foundation, I could hide the exhaustion. I'd gotten expert at the mask over the past 3 years. The commute to downtown Chicago was brutal. Rush hour on the Red Line meant standing room only, and my legs were already aching by the time I reached my stop at Washington/State. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the exhaust from the morning traffic crawling down LaSalle Street. Our office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek building near the Chicago River, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. I love this job, love the creative challenges, and the team I worked with. But lately, even the elevator ride-up seemed to drain what little energy I'd managed to gather. "Morning, Rachel," chirped Monica from reception, her usual cheerful smile brightening the lobby area. "Ready for the big presentation today?" "Absolutely," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. The Hartwell Industries presentation had been weeks in the making. If we landed this account, it would be huge for our small agency. I settled at my desk and opened my laptop, trying to ignore the stiffness in my fingers as I typed. The presentation looked good, clean slides, compelling data, a clear call to action. But as I reviewed it one more time, the words seemed to blur together. I blinked hard, rubbing my temples. "You okay?" asked James, my colleague who worked at the desk next to mine. He was 28, fresh out of Northwestern's MBA program, and had the kind of boundless energy I remembered having once upon a time. "Just tired. Long night finishing this up." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The whole truth was that my brain felt wrapped in cotton, making it hard to focus on even simple tasks. Some days were worse than others, and today was shaping up to be one of the challenging ones. The morning crawled by. I answered emails, attended a team meeting about upcoming campaigns, and tried to prep for the afternoon presentation. But by lunchtime, I felt like I was operating at about 60% capacity. My joints were aching, my energy was flagging, and the familiar brain fog was settling in like a thick Chicago winter cloud. Instead of joining my colleagues for lunch at the sandwich place down the street, I retreated to my car in the parking garage. I reclined the driver's seat and closed my eyes, trying to recharge for 20 minutes. This had become my routine stolen moments of rest that I hoped would get me through the rest of the day. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. "Still on for dinner tonight? Made us a reservation at that new Italian place in River North you wanted to try." I stared at the message, mentally calculating my energy reserves. The presentation was at 2 p.m. Dr. Martinez's appointment was at 4 p.m. If all went well, I might have enough left in the tank for dinner. If not, looking forward to it. I typed back, crossing my fingers that my body would cooperate. The Hartwell presentation went better than expected. Despite feeling like I was thinking through molasses, I managed to deliver the pitch smoothly, answer their questions, and even inject some humor that got genuine laughs. The client seemed impressed, and my boss, Patricia, gave me an approving nod as they filed out of the conference room. "Great work, Rachel," she said as we cleaned up. "I think we got a real shot at landing this one." The praise felt good, but I was running on empty. My next stop was Dr. Martinez's office in the medical district, and I was already dreading the drive through afternoon traffic. Dr. Martinez's office was in a modern building near Rush University Medical Center. The waiting room was typical beige walls, outdated magazines, the faint smell of disinfectant. But Dr. Martinez herself was anything but typical. She was the first doctor who had made me feel heard in 3 years of searching for answers. "Rachel, come on back," she called from the doorway, her warm smile immediately putting me at ease. Dr. Martinez was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd immigrated from Mexico as a child and had built a reputation as one of Chicago's most thorough rheumatologists. Her office was different from other doctors I'd seen. Instead of sitting behind an imposing desk, she had 2 comfortable chairs facing each other near the window. The walls were covered with her diplomas and certifications, but also with photos of patients who'd sent thank you cards and pictures of their lives after diagnosis. "How have you been feeling since our last visit?" she asked as I settled into the familiar chair. "About the same. Good days and bad days. More bad days lately, if I'm being honest." She nodded, making notes in my file. "Tell me about the bad days. What does that look like for you?" This was what I appreciated about Dr. Martinez. She asked specific questions and actually listened to the answers. "The joint pain is getting worse. My hands, my knees, my lower back. Some mornings I can barely make a fist. The fatigue is overwhelming some days, and the brain fog is affecting my work performance, which scares me." "What about the other symptoms we've been tracking? The skin issues, the dry eyes?" I nodded. "The rash on my face comes and goes. The dry eyes are constant now. I go through eye drops like candy." She made more notes, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Rachel, I have your latest test results. The comprehensive autoimmune panel we ran 2 weeks ago." My heart started beating faster. "And your ANA is strongly positive with a homogeneous pattern. Your anti-dsDNA antibodies are elevated and your complement levels are low. Combined with your symptoms, your physical exam findings, and the pattern we've been seeing over the past 6 months." She paused, and I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I believe you have systemic lupus erythematosus. SLE. Lupus. The word hung in the air between us like a heavy weight I'd been carrying without knowing its name. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. As sure as we can be with autoimmune conditions. Your presentation is classic: the joint pain, the fatigue, the skin manifestations, the lab results. It all fits together. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. After 3 years of being told it was stress, that I needed therapy, that I was too young to have anything seriously wrong, I had an answer. A real, medical answer. What does this mean? For my life, my work, my future? Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. It means we can treat this. Lupus is a serious condition, but with proper management, most people live full, productive lives. You're not crazy, you're not weak, and you're certainly not making this up. The last part hit me like a physical blow. She could read the relief on my face. Rachel, I see a lot of patients who've been dismissed for years before getting proper diagnosis. The medical community hasn't always been good at recognizing autoimmune conditions, especially in young women. What you've been going through, the doubt, the feeling like you're losing your mind, that's unfortunately common. We spent the next 30 minutes discussing treatment options, lifestyle changes, and what to expect going forward. She prescribed medications that would help control the inflammation and protect my organs from damage. She gave me educational materials and contact information for support groups. But more than anything, she gave me validation. The knowledge that my suffering was real, measurable, treatable. I want to see you back in 6 weeks to see how you're responding to treatment, she said as our appointment wrapped up. And Rachel, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. You know your body better than anyone. Walking out of her office, I felt lighter despite the serious diagnosis. I had a name for what was wrong with me. I had a treatment plan. I had hope. But I also had dinner with Jessica in an hour, and explaining lupus to someone who'd been questioning my health for months wasn't going to be easy. The Italian restaurant in River North was crowded and noisy, filled with young professionals unwinding after work. Jessica was already seated when I arrived, checking her phone and sipping a glass of Pinot Grigio. There she is, she said, standing to give me a hug. You look great. See, I told you that you just needed to get out more. If only it were that simple. Jessica had been my roommate at University of Illinois, my maid of honor at my almost wedding 3 years ago, a relationship that ended partly because my ex couldn't handle my health issues, and my closest friend through most of my 20s. But lately, our friendship had been strained by my frequent cancellations and her growing impatience with what she saw as my excuses. So what's new? She asked after we'd ordered our entrees. You seemed really stressed in your texts lately. This was it, the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Actually, I got some news today. Medical news. Jessica's expression shifted slightly, and I could see her preparing to deliver another pep talk about stress management or exercise. I was diagnosed with lupus today. Systemic lupus erythematosus. The change in her face was immediate. The casual, slightly patronizing expression melted away, replaced by genuine concern. Lupus. That's serious, isn't it? It's an autoimmune disease. My immune system attacks my own body. It explains all the symptoms I've been having: the joint pain, the fatigue, everything. Jessica set down her wine glass. Oh my God, Rachel. I had no idea. I mean, I knew you weren't feeling well, but you thought I was being dramatic, or lazy, or making excuses. She looked down at her plate, shame coloring her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. How could you? I look fine on the outside. That's the thing about invisible illnesses, they're invisible. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, the noise of the restaurant filling the space between us. What can I do? Jessica finally asked. How can I help? It was a start, but as I looked around the restaurant at all the healthy people enjoying their evening, I realized that Jessica's reaction, the shock, the guilt, the sudden shift from dismissal to concern, was going to be repeated many times over the next few weeks. My family still thought I was always sick with something. They had no idea they were about to learn exactly what that something was. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were a blur of medication adjustments, research, and small battles with my own body as it slowly began responding to treatment. Dr. Martinez had started me on hydroxychloroquine and a low dose of prednisone, warning me that it might take several months to see significant improvement. "Be patient with yourself," she'd said during my follow-up appointment. "Your body has been fighting this war for years. Healing takes time." But patience had never been my strong suit, especially when I still had to navigate the daily challenges of work and relationships while looking perfectly healthy on the outside. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived gray and cold, typical November weather in Chicago. I stood in my kitchen at 6 a.m., staring at the ingredients for my grandmother's apple pie spread across the counter. My hands were stiff and saw a flare-up triggered by stress and the changing weather, but I was determined to follow through on my promise. Peeling 12 Granny Smith apples with aching joints was torture. Every twist of the peeler sent shooting pains through my wrists and fingers. Twice I had to stop and flex my hands, trying to work out the stiffness. But I persevered, driven by a stubborn need to prove that I was still capable, still the same person I'd always been. The pie was in the oven by 10 a.m., and I allowed myself a moment of pride. It looked perfect golden lattice crust, cinnamon and sugar bubbling through the gaps. My grandmother would have been proud, but the effort had cost me. By the time I needed to get ready for dinner at Aunt Linda's house in Naperville, I was exhausted. The drive would take 45 minutes in holiday traffic, and I still needed to shower and get dressed. I chose my outfit carefully, a burgundy sweater that hid the butterfly rash that had appeared across my cheeks that morning, dark jeans that wouldn't show if my knees were swollen, comfortable flats instead of the heels I would have worn in the past. Everything was calculated to minimize questions while maximizing my comfort. The drive to Naperville was brutal. Stop-and-go traffic on I-88, my hands cramping from gripping the steering wheel, the pie sliding around in its carrier on the passenger seat despite my careful cushioning. By the time I pulled into Aunt Linda's driveway, I felt like I'd run a marathon. The house was warm and noisy, filled with the sounds and smells of family gathering. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike had hosted Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember, their split-level home in a quiet subdivision the perfect backdrop for our family traditions. "Rachel!" Aunt Linda swept me into a hug as I walked through the front door, the pie balanced carefully in my hands. "You made it! And you brought dessert. Is that homemade?" "Grandma's apple pie recipe," I confirmed, following her toward the kitchen. "From scratch?" "Honey, you didn't have to go to all that trouble. Especially with how you've been feeling lately." There it was, less than 5 minutes in the door, and already the subtle implication that I wasn't capable of handling trouble. The kitchen was bustling with activity. My mom was mashing potatoes, my sister Ashley was arranging rolls in a basket, and my cousin Tyler was sneaking pieces of stuffing while his wife, Jennifer, pretended not to notice. "Rachel, you look good," my mom said, glancing up from the potatoes. "How are you feeling?" The question everyone asked, loaded with assumption and judgment. "I'm doing well," I replied carefully. "Looking forward to dinner with everyone." "That's great to hear. I was worried about you after our phone call last month. You sounded so down." Down. Another minimization of everything I'd been going through. I helped where I could, setting the table and filling water glasses, but I could feel the familiar fatigue creeping in. The standing, the movement, the noise, it was all more overwhelming than it should have been. I found myself leaning against counters and sitting down whenever possible, trying to conserve energy. "You okay, cuz?" Tyler asked quietly as I sat down at the kitchen island for the 3rd time in an hour. "Just tired from the drive," I lied. By the time we all gathered around the dining room table, I was running on fumes. But the pie had been a hit, and there was something satisfying about seeing my family enjoy something I'd made despite my body's protests. Uncle Mike said grace, as he did every year, and we began passing dishes around the table. Turkey, stuffing, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, all the traditional favorites. The conversation flowed easily at first, catching up on jobs and relationships and holiday plans. But then Ashley, emboldened by her second glass of wine, decided to address the elephant in the room. "So, Rachel, how's work going? Are you still having to take a lot of sick days?" The table went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. "Work is going well," I said carefully. "I landed a big account last month." "That's great," Ashley continued. "But Mom mentioned you've been calling in sick pretty regularly. Is everything okay?" I looked around the table at the faces of people I loved, people who had known me my entire life, and saw skepticism mixed with concern. They were giving me an opening to confess, to admit that maybe I'd been exaggerating, that maybe I was better now. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd been carrying for 2 weeks, waiting for this moment. Actually, there is something I want to share with everyone. I opened the folder and pulled out copies of my lab results, my diagnosis letter from Dr. Martinez, and several informational pamphlets about lupus that I prepared for this exact conversation. 3 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with systemic lupus erythematosus. It's an autoimmune disease where my immune system attacks my own body. I placed the papers in the center of the table, next to the serving bowl of stuffing. The silence was deafening. "These are my test results," I continued, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "My ANA levels, my anti-DNA antibodies, my complement levels. All the blood work that confirms what I've been trying to tell everyone for 3 years. I'm not making this up." My mom reached for the papers with shaking hands, her face pale. "Lupus," she whispered. "But you're so young." "Lupus typically affects women of childbearing age," I said, quoting directly from the pamphlet. "The average age of diagnosis is 29. I'm 32. Ashley leaned over to read the lab results, her earlier confidence crumbling. "Rachel, I had no idea. How could you? You all decided that I was weak, or lazy, or attention-seeking. Every time I mentioned being tired or in pain, you had an explanation that didn't involve actually believing me. The tears came then, 3 years of frustration and hurt pouring out. Do you know what it's like to be in constant pain and have everyone you love think you're faking it? To be so exhausted you can barely function and have people tell you to just exercise more? To feel like your own body is betraying you while everyone around you acts like you're betraying them?" Uncle Mike cleared his throat. "Rachel, we didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I interrupted. "It was easier to assume I was being dramatic than to consider that something might actually be wrong." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo I'd taken that morning, my hands, swollen and stiff, struggling to grip the apple peeler. "This is what my hands looked like when I was making that pie this morning. Every apple one peeled was agony. But I did it anyway because I needed to prove to all of you that I'm not the weak, unreliable person you think I am." The room remained silent except for the sound of my mom crying quietly. "I've been seeing a rheumatologist for months," I continued. "I'm on medication now, and with treatment, I should be able to manage this condition. But I need support, not judgment. I need people who believe me when I say I'm struggling." Jennifer, Tyler's wife, was the first to speak. "What can we do? How can we help?" It was the question I'd been waiting years to hear. Learn about lupus. Understand that just because I look fine doesn't mean I feel fine. Stop assuming that every time I'm sick or tired, it's because I'm weak or making excuses. And maybe apologize for the years of making me feel like I was going crazy. One by one, they did. My mom sobbed as she apologized for not believing me, for making me feel like I was imagining things. Ashley cried as she admitted she thought I was being overdramatic, that she'd been frustrated with my frequent absences from family events. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike apologized for the comments they'd made, the assumptions they'd held. Tyler reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "I'm sorry, cuz. We should have listened." The evening transformed after that. Instead of carefully avoiding the topic of my health, everyone wanted to know more. They asked about lupus, about my treatment, about what they could do to be more supportive. They shared stories of times they'd been frustrated with me, and now understood those moments in a completely different context. "Remember last Christmas when you left early?" Ashley said. "I was so annoyed. I thought you were just being antisocial." "I was having a flare," I explained. "My joints were on fire, and I could barely stay awake. I went home and slept for 14 hours. And the time you canceled on my birthday dinner," my mom added. "I'd been in bed for 2 days with fatigue, so severe I couldn't shower. I felt terrible about missing it." Each story was a small piece of understanding, a moment of connection that had been missing for years. They began to see the invisible struggle I'd been fighting, the daily calculations and compromises that had become my normal. As the evening wound down and we cleaned up the dishes together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the support of my family. Not just their love, which had always been there despite the tension, but their actual understanding and support. "I'm proud of you," my mom said as she helped me carry dishes to the kitchen. "For advocating for yourself, for getting answers, for not giving up." "I'm proud of that pie," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. "My hands may hate me, but it was worth it." She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, honey. I should have believed you. I should have been on your side from the beginning." "You're on my side now," I said. "That's what matters." Driving home that night, the empty pie plate on the passenger seat beside me, I felt lighter than I had in years. The diagnosis had given me answers, but tonight had given me something even more valuable, my family back. My phone buzzed with messages throughout the drive home. Ashley sending me links to lupus support groups. Tyler asking if I needed anything from the grocery store, since he was going tomorrow. My mom wondering if I'd like her to come to my next doctor's appointment. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't facing this alone. 3 months after Thanksgiving, I sat in Dr. Martinez's office for my regular follow-up appointment, but this time the chair across from me wasn't empty. My mom sat beside me, a small notebook in her lap where she'd written down questions she wanted to ask. "How are you responding to the medication adjustments?" Dr. Martinez asked, reviewing my latest lab results. "Better," I said and meant it. "The morning stiffness is improving, and I'm having more good days than bad days now." "That's excellent news. Your inflammatory markers are coming down, and your kidney function looks stable. The hydroxychloroquine is doing its job." My mom leaned forward slightly. "Doctor, I've been reading about lupus online probably too much, and I'm worried about long-term complications. What should we be watching for?" Dr. Martinez smiled patiently. She'd grown accustomed to my mom's presence at appointments and her careful questions. After years of dismissing my symptoms, my mother had thrown herself into learning about lupus with the determination of someone making up for lost time. "The key is consistent monitoring and medication compliance," Dr. Martinez explained. "Rachel is responding well to treatment, and with proper management, most lupus patients live normal lifespans." Normal. That word had taken on new meaning over the past few months. My new normal meant taking medication every morning with breakfast, the small pills that were helping my immune system calm down. It meant regular blood tests to monitor my kidney function and liver enzymes. It meant sunscreen even on cloudy Chicago days, because lupus made me more sensitive to UV light. But it also meant having energy again. Not every day, and not like before, but enough to feel like myself most of the time. "Any questions about work accommodations?" Dr. Martinez asked. We discussed this topic several times over the winter. "Actually, things have been going really well at work," I said. "I talked to HR about my diagnosis, and they've been incredibly supportive. That conversation with Patricia, my boss, had been terrifying. I'd expected judgment or concerns about my reliability. Instead, she'd listened thoughtfully and immediately started brainstorming ways to help me succeed. "We can adjust your schedule for medical appointments," she'd said. "And if you need to work from home on difficult days, that's completely fine. Your work quality has always been excellent, Rachel. We just want to make sure you have what you need to keep doing great work." The company had even brought in a speaker for their monthly wellness lunch to talk about invisible disabilities and chronic illness. Afterward, 2 other colleagues had quietly approached me to share their own health struggles, one with Crohn's disease, another with fibromyalgia. I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. "That's wonderful," Dr. Martinez said. "A supportive work environment makes a huge difference in managing chronic illness." After the appointment, my mom and I stopped for coffee at a little cafe near the medical center. It had become our tradition, a chance to debrief about the doctor visit and catch up on life. "You look so much better," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "Not just physically. You seem lighter." She was right. The constant stress of hiding my symptoms, of pretending to be fine when I wasn't, had been exhausting in ways I hadn't fully realized until it was gone. "It's amazing what happens when people actually believe you," I said. "When you don't have to constantly defend your own experience of your body." My mom's face fell slightly, the guilt still fresh after all these months. "I hate that we made you feel that way. I keep thinking about all the times." "Mom!" I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "We can't change the past. But look at us now. You're here, you're learning, You're supporting me. That means everything. She squeezed my hand, careful not to press too hard on my joints. She'd learned those small considerations that made such a big difference. Jessica called me yesterday, I said, changing the subject. She wants to plan a girls' weekend, but she's checking with me about timing and activities first, making sure we pick things I can handle. The transformation in my friendships had been remarkable. Jessica had become one of my biggest advocates, researching lupus-friendly restaurants and planning activities that wouldn't drain my energy. She'd even started following lupus awareness accounts on social media, sharing posts about invisible illness with thoughtful comments. That's wonderful, honey. What are you thinking of doing? Maybe a spa weekend in Lake Geneva. Something relaxing where we can just talk and catch up without a lot of physical demands. It was a far cry from our old weekend plans that involved dancing until 2 a.m. and hiking trails the next morning. But different didn't mean worse. It just meant adapted to who I was now. My phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. She'd been sending me articles and memes about chronic illness, sometimes multiple times a day. It was her way of showing she was thinking about me and trying to understand. Saw this, and thought of you 10 things not to say to someone with lupus. Number 3 made me cringe thinking about things I used to say. Love you, sis. I showed the message to my mom, who smiled. She's really trying. We all are. That's what matters. After coffee, I drove back to my apartment in Lincoln Park. The spring afternoon was warm and sunny, perfect weather that would have energized me in the past. Now I had to be more careful about sun exposure, but I could still enjoy it with proper precautions. My apartment felt different these days. Instead of being a refuge where I hid from the world, it had become a comfortable base where I could rest and recharge without shame. I'd invested in better ergonomic furniture, softer lighting, and organizational systems that made daily tasks easier on difficult days. I settled onto my couch with my laptop to catch up on work emails. The presentation for the Morrison account needed some tweaks, and I wanted to review the quarterly campaign metrics before tomorrow's team meeting. But first, I opened a new document and began typing. Living with Lupus, a guide for family and friends. Over the past month, I've been working on a resource guide based on my own experience. What I wish people had known, what had been helpful, what had made things harder. Dr. Martinez had encouraged me to consider sharing my story more broadly, maybe through the Lupus Foundation or support groups. Understanding invisible illness, lupus doesn't always look like sickness. Some days I feel fine, other days I'm in significant pain or exhausted despite adequate sleep. Both experiences are valid and real. Writing about my experience felt therapeutic, but more than that, it felt purposeful. If my story could help one other person feel less alone, or help one family understand their loved one better, then maybe all the difficult years had served a purpose. My phone rang. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. Hey, cuz, how'd the doctor appointment go? This was another new normal family members who actually cared about my medical updates, who asked specific questions, and remembered what I told them. Really well. My lab results are looking good, and Dr. Martinez is happy with how I'm responding to treatment. That's awesome. Hey, Jennifer and I were talking, and we want to do something for Lupus Awareness Month in May. Maybe organize a walk or a fundraiser. Would you be interested in helping plan it? The offer touched me deeply. Tyler and Jennifer had become some of my strongest supporters, educating themselves about lupus and finding ways to get involved in advocacy. I'd love that. The Lupus Foundation has resources for organizing awareness events. Perfect. I'll reach out to them this week. Jennifer's already got some ideas for getting her work colleagues involved. After we hung up, I sat for a moment appreciating how much had changed. 6 months ago, I was dreading family gatherings and avoiding my closest relationships. Now I had a network of people who understood my condition and wanted to help raise awareness. The work emails could wait. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and visited the online support group I'd joined after my diagnosis. It was a private Facebook group for young women with lupus, and it had become an invaluable source of practical advice and emotional support. Someone had posted about struggling with family members who didn't understand her fatigue. I thought about my own journey and began typing a response. I know exactly how you feel. For 3 years, my family thought I was making excuses or being dramatic. The turning point came when I brought my actual lab results and diagnosis letter to Thanksgiving dinner. Sometimes people need to see the medical evidence to understand that our symptoms are real. It's not fair that we have to prove ourselves, but sometimes that's what it takes to get the support we need. Several other group members had replied with similar stories, offering encouragement and practical suggestions. Reading their responses reminded me how important community was in managing chronic illness. I spent the rest of the afternoon working on my presentation, my energy holding steady in a way that still felt remarkable after years of afternoon crashes. The medication was working, but more than that, the reduction in stress from having supportive relationships had made a huge difference in my overall well-being. As evening approached, I started preparing dinner, nothing elaborate, just grilled chicken and roasted vegetables, but made with the kind of attention to nutrition that had become part of managing my condition. Dr. Martinez had referred me to a nutritionist who specialized in autoimmune conditions, and we'd worked together to identify foods that helped reduce inflammation. While the vegetables roasted, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery person holding a bouquet of flowers. "Rachel Thompson?" "That's me." The card read, "Thinking of you after today's appointment. Proud of how strong you are. Love, Mom and Dad." 6 months ago, I would have been shocked by such a gesture. My parents had always loved me, but they'd struggled to understand why I couldn't just push through my symptoms. Now they were sending flowers after routine doctor visits, acknowledging the effort it took to manage my condition. I arranged the flowers in a vase and placed them on my kitchen counter, their bright colors lifting my mood even higher. That evening, I video called with Jessica, who was planning our Lake Geneva weekend. "I found this amazing spa that has a quiet relaxation area," she said, her laptop screen showing the resort website. "And there's a lake view room available if we want to just sit and talk instead of doing activities." That sounds perfect. The old me might have felt guilty about needing accommodations, but I'd learned to appreciate friends who made effort to include me rather than exclude me. "Oh, and I talked to my mom about lupus," Jessica continued. "She felt terrible about some of the things she'd said in the past about you being high maintenance. She wants to send you an apology card." The ripple effects of my diagnosis and openness about it continued to surprise me. People I hadn't expected were reevaluating their assumptions about illness and disability. "You don't have to manage other people's guilt," I said. "But I appreciate that she's thinking about it." "I know. I want everyone to understand what you've been going through. What you're still going through." After we hung up, I reflected on how much my relationships had deepened since my diagnosis. The people who truly cared about me had stepped up in ways I hadn't expected, while a few relationships had faded, and that was okay too. Chronic illness had been an unexpected filter, helping me identify the people who would support me through difficult times. Before bed, I took my evening medications and reviewed my schedule for tomorrow. Work meeting at 10 a.m., lunch with my college friend Maria, who was visiting Chicago, grocery shopping, and a quiet evening at home. It was a full but manageable day, planned with the kind of intentionality that had become second nature. I also made a note in my planner to call Dr. Martinez's office about participating in a patient panel for medical students. She'd asked if I'd be interested in sharing my diagnostic journey to help future doctors better recognize autoimmune conditions in young patients. "Your story could help prevent other patients from going through what you experienced," she'd said. "The years of being dismissed, the delay in diagnosis, we can do better." The opportunity to turn my difficult experience into something that might help others felt like the perfect circle completion. As I settled into bed, I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything. The moment I'd placed those lab results on the table and finally said, "This is real." It had been terrifying and empowering in equal measure. Now, months later, I had my answer to everyone who had ever said I was always sick with something. Yes, I was. I was sick with lupus, a serious, chronic autoimmune condition that required ongoing medical management and lifestyle adjustments. But I was also living with lupus, not just surviving it. I had my career, my relationships, my hopes for the future. I had bad days and good days, but I also had the support system I'd been missing for so long. Most importantly, I had the truth. And the truth, even when it came with a chronic illness diagnosis, had set me free. The next morning brought the familiar routine, medication with breakfast, checking in with my body to assess the day's energy levels, planning my activities accordingly. But it also brought text messages from family members, a work meeting I was excited about, and the knowledge that I was exactly where I needed to be. Living with lupus wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a good life. A full life. A life where I was finally, completely, authentically myself. And that was worth every difficult conversation, every medical appointment, every moment of advocacy it had taken to get here.